sections. We're focusing on the stories of the book of Genesis, making our way through. We're in the middle of the story of Jacob. And what we studied last week is as Jacob is about to have this confrontation with his brother Esau after being gone for 20 years. For 20 years, Jacob is exiled outside the land of Israel. That is where he marries. That's where he raises most of his family. He's still going to have another child. He's going to have Benjamin. That hasn't happened yet. But at this point, he is entering the land of Israel after a 20-year exile. And he finds out that his brother Esau is coming towards him with an army of 400 men. And he prepares for that battle. As we studied last week, he prepares in a number of ways. He prepares for battle. He prepares by sending many gifts to Esau, hoping to appease Esau. And he prays to God. And it is this three-pronged approach that he takes in trying to diffuse the situation. Then the Torah tells us this very strange episode. As he is crossing his family across a river, he ends up being alone on one side of the river, and his entire family has already crossed the river. And as he's there alone, suddenly a stranger approaches him and begins wrestling with him. And this individual was extremely strong, and Jacob was extremely strong, and they wrestled through the night. At some point, we become aware that the individual he's wrestling with is not a regular human being, but an angel. And as the commentaries explain to us, it was the guardian angel of Esau that was coming to defeat Jacob. And Jacob refuses to give in. He continues to battle all through the night. He will not let go. The angel injures Jacob. He injures him on his thigh, and still Jacob will not surrender. And finally, when it comes to daylight, the angel says to Jacob, you need to release me. I need to go back to my shift up in the heavenly world. My shift here is over. And Jacob says, no, I'm not releasing you. I will not release you until you bless me. And the blessing that this angel will give is that your name will no longer be Jacob, but it will be Yisrael, Israel. That's where we get our name from. Kisarisa im Elokim vatuchal, because you have wrestled with the divine and you have won. You have defeated me. I couldn't take you down. And as we started speaking last week, this entire episode is a symbolic story. It actually happened. There was a real wrestling match. Jacob actually got injured, but at the same time, this is all rather cosmic, and it's telling of a future of what Jacob and his descendants will be going through. The enemies of the Jewish people will fight with the Jewish descendants. They will wrestle with them to stop them from fulfilling their mission. Just like the guardian angel of Esau here was attempting to stop Jacob from going on with the mission of creating a chosen people, so too will our descendants, the descendants of the Jewish people, find those enemies that will wrestle with them to stop them from completing their mission. Until when? Until the break of dawn, until the darkness of exile will end, which means until the Mashiach comes, we will always be involved in this wrestling, in this battle. Jacob understands that this is a cosmic battle, and he won't allow himself to be defeated because he knows that his defeat would be our defeat. And when the angel saw that he could not be victorious, he grabs hold of the hip socket of his thigh and he dislocates it. And still Jacob would not give in. This lonely man stands up against all forces. They wound him, they hurt him, they injure him, they cause him pain, but surrender? Not Jacob. Not Jacob. He will not surrender. We don't give in. We don't surrender. The world thought post-Holocaust they saw the end of our people, that we will surrender, we'll give up. We don't surrender. It's not part of our vocabulary. Moses knew what he was saying when he said, a stiff-necked people. One of the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, that was put on trial at the Nuremberg trial, in 1946 was the commandant of Auschwitz. His name was Rudolf Hess. And in his testimony, he brags about the success of the Auschwitz concentration camp. He took pride in how efficient Auschwitz ran in comparison to the other concentration camps. And I quote from his trial, whereas the other gas chambers were only able to kill 200 people at a time, we built gas chambers that could kill 2,000 at a time. Millions killed, and he was proud. And he said this, that Eichmann and Hitler were absolutely convinced that if they could succeed in destroying the biological basis of Jewry in the East by complete extermination, then Jewry as a whole would never recover from the blow. And Jewry would come to an end. So they asked him, well, what about the Jews of the West? Certainly they knew that there were millions of Jews in America. And I quote again his response, the assimilated Jew of the West would be in no position and would have no desire to make good this enormous loss of blood, and there would therefore be no future generations worth mentioning. When you read this, you begin to understand how thoroughly calculated the Nazis were. They had it all worked out. It wasn't enough to make Europe Judenrein. It wasn't the end of Jewry in Europe that they plotted. It was the end of world Jewry that they planned for. It was the end of world Jewry that they desired, that they plotted. For they believed that if they could wipe out European Jewry, Jewry would come to an end because Jewry would never be able to rebound from such destruction. They would be defeated. They would be orphaned. They would be beaten and they would be crushed. And assimilation would take care of the remnants of the Jewish family. Once and for all, the Jewry and the Jewish people would be rid of from the world. They would have accomplished what so many tried before them but failed. So what went wrong with this evil plan? They sure did their part. 6 million Jews, 6 million. The number is too big to fathom. So what happened to the rest of the formula? How is it that we're still here? Go back to that wrestling match with Jacob. We could be down, we could be injured, but we're never defeated. I heard a story about a group of Jews that were being led to the gas chambers. And one of them started singing a song in Yiddish, Los mir sich überbeten. It's time to start asking forgiveness from God for our past sins. It was a known song in Yiddish. And he understood that momentarily he would be standing in the heavenly court. So this would be a good time to pray to God and ask for forgiveness. That song didn't resonate. It didn't catch on with the rest of the group. They didn't feel that it was they who needed to ask for forgiveness. One member of the group did a play on the words of the song and started singing slightly different words. Sounds the same in Yiddish. Mir wollen sich ze überleben. But it has very different meaning. It means we will survive them. We will outlive them. That song resonated. So before you knew it, here's a group of Jews being led to a gas chamber. They know exactly what's about to happen. And they begin singing, Wir wollen sich ze überleben, louder and louder, livelier and livelier. We're going to out-survive them. No, maybe not us, but we, the Jewish people, will. And as the showers went on, they broke into their final dance of life. We will survive. Because they knew, they believed that there would be a tomorrow for Judaism, that the mission would go on, that Eichmann and Hess and Hitler Yamach Shemai would be proven wrong. The angel says to Jacob, release me. I have to go back upstairs. My shift is over. And Jacob says, no, not so fast. You need to bless me. Concede that our people, that our nation will ultimately be victorious over its enemies. and its mission accomplished. And this angel, the guardian angel of Esav, has to concede this to Jacob. Indeed, you will never be defeated. Yisrael, Israel, Am Yisrael Chai. The people of Yisrael, the people of Israel will live on forever and ever. The Talmud on this story asks this very strange question and an even stranger answer. Okay, the Talmud says, how did this angel look? How did the angel look to Jacob? Now, I understand the question, did the angel look like an angel or like a human being? And obviously like a human being, because when the story first begins, it's described that suddenly Jacob finds himself wrestling with another man. At some point, we begin to understand that it's just disguised as a man, but he's an angel. But the Talmud wants to know more than that. What did he look like? And the answer is even stranger. The answer has a two-way argument, as everything else in the Talmud. Rabbi Shmuel and Rava argue. Rav Shmuel says he appeared like an idolater. Rava says, no, he appeared like a scholar. Scholar versus idolater. What does that mean? What does an idolater look like? What does a scholar look like? And perhaps what the Talmud is saying, it wasn't the argument of physical appearance. Perhaps the question is, what is the ultimate threat to Jacob? What is the ultimate threat to the people of Jacob? What is the ultimate threat to Yisrael, to the Jewish people? One opinion, idolatry, meaning the enemy is idolaters. The enemy is Rome. The enemy is Spain. The enemy is the Inquisition, is the pogroms, is the Nazis, is Stalin. That which openly, visibly appears to be the antithesis of Judaism. Hate and evil. So you easily recognize them. You know the Nazis are not in part of what the Jewish ideal would be. You know the pogroms are evil. You know Stalin is evil. You know Rome and Spain and Babylon. They conquered us. They destroyed us. They wanted to see us dead. Rava says the angel appeared like a scholar. What does that mean? He came with love. Tear down the division. Assimilate with us. We love you. Be a part of us. The Talmud says we have to be on guard for both in order to survive. Let me tell you a story in the Talmud. It's a strange story, and then there's a story within the story, so bear with me, everyone. The Talmud tells us, the Torah says that after Jacob fought with this mysterious man in the middle of the night, the verse says this: the sun rose and was shining upon him as he passed Penuel. Penuel is the location of the fight, and he was limping on his thigh. So instead of it simply saying that he got up after the wrestling match, after he releases the angel and he crosses the river, it says the sun rose and was shining on him. Interesting words. So the Talmud tells us a story. The story involves Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yehoshua, and Rabbi Akiva, three of the greatest sages living in the 2nd century CE. This is a few decades after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in the year 70 CE. Okay? Three sages, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Akiva. Let me set the scene for you, because the Talmud sets the scene of the story. They were in a market, and they went specifically to a market that was selling kosher meat. And the Talmud tells us why they were in a market that was selling meat, because they needed to buy meat for the wedding of Rabbi Gamliel's son. So Rabbi Gamliel, one of these three sages, his son was getting married, and the three of them go to buy meat for the wedding. While they're standing in line in the meat market, Rabbi Akiva asks Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua about the verse that I just quoted to you. about this verse, about the story of Jacob and this wrestling match, and asking, what does it mean that the sun shined on him? If the sun was shining, it wasn't shining just on Jacob. It was shining on the world. Whoever was there, the sun was shining on them. What does it mean? The sun was shining on Jacob. Was there a spotlight of a sun that had only shined on one person? You know, if there's a stage, the rest of the room is dark, and the spotlight just shines at the person at the podium, I get it. But the sun shines everywhere. So Rabbi Akiva asks Rabbi Gamliel, what does that verse mean that the sun shined on Jacob? To which the response came, the sun that set for him rose for him. I'll repeat myself. The sun that set for him rose for him. What does that mean? 20 years earlier, when Jacob began his journey from the Holy Land, and he had to run for his life and leave and run to the city of Haran in Mesopotamia, the Torah tells us that he stopped off at night. You remember that? We discussed it. We had the dream of the ladder. And there it says he encounters the place and he slept there. And the Torah says because the sun had set. So when he starts that journey, the sun set. And when he's coming home now, the verse says, and the sun rose for him. Interesting story in the Talmud about the verse that we're studying. I have 4 questions on this story. 4 questions. Number 1, what's the meaning of the Talmud's answer that the sun which set for him now rose for him? Again, I see the play on words that the sun set and the sun rose, but what does it mean for him? The sun set for everyone and the sun rose for everyone. Number 2, why was it necessary for the Talmud to tell us the details that this discussion was taking place while they were on the line in a meat market? It doesn't ever tell us where they're having their debates. They have their debates everywhere. The Talmud doesn't tell us what they were wearing that day, what day of the week it was. It just tells us their debates and their discussions. Here, by the way, I want to tell you that they were going to the meat market and they had this discussion. Why is that so important? Number 3, of all the discussions to have in the meat market, why did Rabbi Akiva decide to discuss the sun shining for Jacob after his fight with the angel in the middle of the night, and to decide to ask that question there standing on line in the meat market? What triggered this thought in Rabbi Akiva that, oh, I have a question because I'm standing here waiting to get some brisket. Oh, I have to know, what does it mean? What does the verse mean? That same question existed yesterday when you were in the house of study. Why didn't you ask the question then? Why are you asking it right now? What are we missing? And finally, the Jewish question of the year. What were 3 of the greatest sages of the generation doing in a meat market purchasing some meat? I know there was a wedding going on, but hire a caterer. Send one of your students. Imagine you're shutting down 3 of the greatest scholars that is alive at that time, 3 of the greatest professors in the greatest university. Stop everything because there's a wedding. We got to go pick out a cut of meat. They each had many assistants and many students who they could have sent on an errand to buy meat, or they could have hired a chef or a caterer or a party planner. Those are my questions. Obviously, every story in the Talmud is there for a reason. As we've been looking into the stories of the book of Genesis, we can do the same on the stories of the Talmud. So let me give you the background here, and you'll see the answers to these 4 questions and how powerful of a story this is. The story is taking place in perhaps the worst of times for our people, dire times. The 3 sages mentioned in the story, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Akiva, they lived during one of the most difficult periods of Jewish history, when Roman oppression reached its peak. With a clear ambition, they had to destroy all of Jewish life in Palestine. That was the new name the Romans gave Judea. And they wanted to wipe out every single Jew. Millions of Jews were massacred. Hundreds of thousands were sold into slavery. The Bar Kokhba revolt, if you know your history, would be crushed with the greatest barbarity, resulting in the apparent end of Jewish life and culture. It looked like it was over. Rabbi Akiva himself, as well as Rabbi Gamliel's son Shimon, we'll know later in history, were tortured by these same Romans. They were executed by the Romans. Jews were downtrodden. They were desperate, and at times they were hopeless. The situation was so bad that the sages considered the idea of prohibiting marriage and procreation. It was actually debated and discussed if they should outlaw marriage and having children so as not to bring children to a world which the world would destroy them. Why bring children into a world when these children will be murdered? Why didn't they issue the decree? Why didn't it pass? There are two versions of the Talmudic answer as to why this idea of prohibiting marriage and prohibiting childbirth didn't pass. One, because the Jews wouldn't obey such a decree. You can't make a decree that you know people are not going to listen to. And two, more philosophical. We are taught not to meddle in the workings of history. We do what God told us to do. And God told us to bring children into the world. And God will have to take care of the rest. And therefore, it was decided, yes, it's the worst of times, but we're not going to dictate to people if they should get married or should have children. Let each one make their own decision. But the spirit at the time bordered on hopelessness. Enters Rabbi Akiva into the scene of Jewish history. In order to fully grasp the story of the wedding day and the meat market and Rabbi Akiva's question, I need to share with you another story about Rabbi Akiva. This is a story perhaps you've heard from me before if you've listened to me over the years. But even if you have, it's always good listening to this story again. It's a very powerful story. The Talmud in the Tractate of Makos tells us a story of four sages. Rabbi Gamliel, who we were talking about, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yeshua, again one of the characters in our story, and Rabbi Akiva, also one of the characters in the meat market story. This story takes place shortly after the destruction of the Second Holy Temple. And these four sages, they are walking together amongst the ruins of Jerusalem. And as they walked amongst the rubble, it was a horrific scene of devastation and destruction. And then to add insult to injury, at the moment that they reached the Temple Mount is totally in rubble, the Holy Temple destroyed, burnt to the ground, all just ashes there. At the moment that they reached the Temple Mount, a fox comes crawling out from under the rubble, right at the very spot where the Holy of Holies of the temple once stood. Within the temple, there was different levels of holiness. The holiest room of the temple was called the Holy of Holies, and that's where the Ark of the Covenant was. And this fox was coming out of the room, out of the area where the room once stood of the Holy of Holies. This sight of desecration was too much to bear. And the Talmud says Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Yeshua began sobbing and weeping uncontrollably. They couldn't stop the crying after seeing this. Says the Talmud about Rabbi Akiva mitzachek. Rabbi Akiva began to laugh. Rabbi Akiva was laughing. So his colleagues turned to him in shock and say, Akiva, mipnei ma ata mitzachek? Akiva, how are you laughing at a time like this? At a place like this? At a time like this? Do you see what we're seeing? Have you lost your mind? There's nothing joyous here. There's nothing humorous here. To which Rabbi Akiva responds, mipnei ma atem bochim? You asking me, why am I laughing? I'll turn the question on you. Why are you crying? So they said, what do you mean, why are we crying? Can't you see? This is Yerushalayim. This is Jerusalem. It lies in waste. This is the Temple Mount, burned to the ground. This is the Holy of Holies, and foxes are roaming in the rubble. Says Rabbi Akiva, Lekach ani mitzachek. That's why I'm laughing. You see, all of this that we're witnessing right now, it was all prophesied to us thousands of years ago. Were we not told by our prophets that this day would come? That Al Har Tzion Sheshamim Shualim Hilchu Vo, that the very hallowed ground upon which we worshipped in glory and freedom would one day lie in ruins, and that foxes would roam amongst the ruins. I'm seeing the fulfillment of prophecy. The prophets told us about this destruction. They told us it would happen, and they said it in such vivid detail. And I see it happening right in front of my eyes as I see a fox roaming in the rubble. Those are the words that they used. So why do I laugh when I see this destruction? I laugh because now that we can see as sure as day that all the prophecies with regard to the destruction of the temple have been fulfilled in their entirety, down to the very last detail of foxes roaming among the ruins. There can be no room for doubt that all of the prophecies with regard to the future redemption of Israel and the return of all exiles to our homeland will likewise be fulfilled in their entirety, down to the very last detail. I now know, now I believe, I know all the words of the prophets are true. I know that there will be redemption. I know the Messiah will come. I know we will be back in Jerusalem. I know Jerusalem will be rebuilt. Because every detail of the prophecy of destruction came true, and then every detail of the rebuilding will also come true. So the question is not, how can I laugh? The real question is, how can you not laugh? Now with these words, they reply to Akiva, Akiva, you have consoled us. Akiva, you have consoled us. You have given us comfort. Rabbi Akiva, in his vision of the future, can see that the day would come that Jewish boys and girls would be dancing once again in Jerusalem. Rabbi Akiva was able to see through the ashes that millions would return to their homeland. Rabbi Akiva was able to see through the ashes that there will be the day of the coming of Mashiach, that there will be the rebuilding of the temple, that the divine presence will return to this world, not because he was naive, but because he understood that God may be concealed, but God is not dead. That evil may be powerful, but it's not eternal. That the tyranny of Rome may be all pervasive, but it's not everlasting. Rabbi Akiva understood that even in the darkest sunset, it's just a prelude to a sunrise. So now let's go back to our meat market story. I hope you're still with me. I hope you remember the story. They're online in the meat market on the day of Rabbi Gamliel's child's wedding. They're buying brisket or some other cut of meat. And Rabbi Akiva asks the question about the verse of the story of Jacob wrestling with the angel as to what does it mean when it says, and the sun rose and shined upon him. Now let's fill in the missing pieces. Rabbi Akiva was walking with his friends to buy meat for the wedding of Rabbi Gamliel's son. Rabbi Gamliel is thinking, what am I doing? I'm marrying off my son so that I can see grandchildren who will be murdered by the Romans? Is that what I'm doing? We're going to dance at a wedding. We're going to celebrate life and love when we know that on that very day, the Romans murdered another Jewish community and we're going to dance? How can we buy meat? Meat represents the joy and passion of a wedding feast when the Jewish world is weeping. How can there be a wedding tonight? This would be the same question that Holocaust survivors would ask themselves after the demise of their closest kin How can we bring children into a world which stood silent as 1.5 million kinderlach, 1.5 million children were gassed? There was something even more at stake. Rabbi Gamliel was the Nasi. He was the leader. He was the leader of the Sanhedrin, of the leader of the Supreme Court. He was the spiritual leader of the Jewish people. Even more so, he was a descendant of King David. And it was his family which held the office of royalty within the Jewish nation. In fact, since the sage Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai convinces Vespasian, the Roman commander in charge of the destruction of Jerusalem, who later becomes the emperor of Rome, to spear the dynasty of Rabbi Gamliel. It's a whole separate story that I won't get into now, but Vespasian gives Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he gives him 3 wishes, and one of which he says is, leave the dynasty of Rabbi Gamliel in place. Why? Because Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai knew that Mashiach is a descendant of King David. And we need the seed of Mashiach to stay alive, not to be destroyed. So now this Rabbi Gamliel is marrying off his son. This would be the child who would carry within himself the promise of the future redemption. This would be the child who would continue the chain of King David until Mashiach comes. It will be through him, through this child getting married. And the rabbis got involved in preparing the meat for this great event. Why? Because it wasn't just another wedding. It was the wedding that would symbolize the eternity of Israel. It would be the wedding that would symbolize the faith in redemption. But Rabbi Gamliel was broken. That future was not foreseeable. The sun had set on Jewish existence and life. It was dark. Enters again Rabbi Akiva, the man who laughed when he saw a fox emerging from the Holy of Holies. Rabbi Akiva sees that Rabbi Gamliel is in a state of despair. He sees that he's not rejoicing on the day of his son's wedding. So Rabbi Akiva wants to breathe life and spirit into his friend, into his colleague, and by extension, into his people. So he invokes the verse in the portion that we are studying, in the story that we're studying, describing Jacob's quarrel, Jacob's wrestling match with this adversary, causing him to limp, causing him injury, causing him pain. And then the verse says, and the sun rose and was shining upon him. Did the sun only shine upon him and not the rest of the world? Rabbi Akiva asked. And the answer was, if you remember, the sun which set for him now shined on him. This was Rabbi Akiva's message. Look at what happened to Jacob 20 years earlier. He reached the lowest of the low of his life. He had to run from home. His brother was trying to kill him. He had nothing to call his own. There he is, alone in the world, and the sun sets for him. Both figuratively and literally, the sun set for Jacob. It gets dark. Jacob moves into a period of night and goes into exile with a loved one who tries to rob him and cheat him. The sun had at last set on our father Jacob. But what happened? Jacob persevered. He didn't give up just because the sun set, just because it was dark, just because it was difficult, just because he was in exile. No, he got married. He got cheated. He continued to go on. He builds a family. And finally, after 2 decades, he thought he would return to his homeland, and suddenly this adversary rises in the middle of the night and injures him, just when he thought night was over. As the saying goes, it's not over till it's over. And the fight for survival still continues. But Jacob fought. He was hurt. He was maimed. He was limping. But he didn't stop the fight because he knew that dawn would break and the light would return. And what happens, says Rabbi Akiva, look into the Torah and you'll see what happens. The sun rose and shined for him. The same sun which was once set for him that brought darkness to his world now rose to shine on him. After the long exile, Vayavo Yaakov Sholem, Jacob arrives home. A survivor of Auschwitz once related this personal experience. He said, every morning, as the sun rose over Auschwitz, my heart would swell with anger at the sun. How could the sun be so indifferent to the suffering of millions and just rise again to cast its warm glow on a world drenched in the blood of the purest and holiest of our people? How can the sun be so cruel? How could the sun be so apathetic? Why can't the sun just die and let night reign forever? How can the sun shine in such darkness? But then I survived. And I came out of the hell. And the day after liberation, as I lie in bed for the first time in years, I watched the sun rise. And for the first time in a long time, I felt so grateful to the sun. I felt empowered that after the long night, which seemed to never end, light has arrived. Rabbi Akiva was telling his colleagues, what happened to our forefathers is a sign for their children. Our sun has set, but our sun will also rise again. We will dance and we will celebrate and we will eat meat at the wedding of Rabbi Gamliel's son, because life and love and hope will prevail. Netzach Yisrael lo yishaka, the eternal one of Israel does not lie. And God promised us that we will be an eternal nation. There will be an end to the night. The sun that set for us during the time of destruction will eventually rise for us again. Our nation will come back whole again, both materially and spiritually. And 2,000 years after Rabbi Akiva was online in the meat market having this discussion with his colleagues, guess what? We're still here. He was right. He was right. He was right to laugh. He was right to buy meat, because there is a future for the Jewish people. And there is a Jerusalem today packed with Jews, packed with children, packed with seniors. And there's a Jewish world all over the globe with proud Jews. Jews that celebrate freedom, Jews that have freedom, Jews that can practice. Rabbi Akiva knew why he was laughing, and he knew why he was lifting the spirits of Rabbi Gamliel. I wanted to get into the actual confrontation of Jacob and Esau tonight, but I see we'll leave that for next week. So next week, we're going to talk about two parts of the story. The final part of the Jacob versus Esau story. What happens when the two actually meet? Does it turn into a confrontation, or does it turn into a reunion? And then we're going to study another sad chapter of Jacob's life, and that's the abduction of Dinah. So all of that will be next week. Just a quick note before you all leave. Our gala this year is always held in June. This year it's going to be a virtual gala. So all of you will be able to join us. It'll be June 9th. It's a Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. You'll be able to all watch it live at chabadgala.com. And we have a wonderful, wonderful lineup of entertainment for you. We have Tony Orlando, Dudu Fisher, Eighth Day, Benny Friedman, a whole list of great entertainers that are going to entertain for us. And we have some wonderful speakers, the likes of Dennis Prager, Michael Medved, Joseph Telushkin. It's going to be a wonderful evening. Please mark the day on your calendar of June 9th at 7 p.m. Together with our annual gala is our annual fundraising campaign. Most of you have already contributed, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your support, for all of your help, especially during this very difficult year when so many relied on us for support for them, for their rent and for their food. Baruch Hashem, we were able to provide for all of them thanks to all of you. If you haven't as of yet participated in this campaign, please take a moment, do it this evening. Go to chabadgala.com, CHABADGALA, chabadgala.com, and make a pledge or a donation. We really can use your support, and we really appreciate it. Thank you all so much. We'll see you on Wednesday at 12:30. For the next few weeks on Wednesday, 12:30, I'm going to be focusing on Israel, on Eretz Yisrael. So if you want to join me on some of these talks, I think it'll be perhaps for the next 3 weeks. Join me this Wednesday at 12:30, Israel, a shining light. Wednesday, 12:30, and we'll send out the Zoom links or just get it on jewishacademy.com/weekly. You'll get the link to the Wednesday class. We'll see you all. Take care.